Welcome.
Thank you.
This is Sarita Runeberg. She is the CEO of the Nordics leading campus, Maria 01.
Correct.
Welcome.
Thank you.
So we'd like to ask you a few questions as part of this
All
Halloween-themed enterprise.
Sounds exciting.
So, working with partners is essential, but can sometimes lead to unexpected terms. Have you ever had a relationship with a partner go wrong or even turn into a nightmare?
I have, I think, quite a few times. I could tell this story about like the one time that a partner made me cry, and that never happens. Like really seriously never happens, but that's a sad story. So let's kind of stay away from that. But there's actually another one that I think is it's quite an interesting one because it has a kind of a good ending as well. So one time I had this one particular customer in Spain on the Spanish market when I was working with that, and so I was on summer holiday, and during the summer apparently something had happened. And so this partner was like really very upset, and so they escalated things like really high up in the organization as well. And I was really like worried that that's something that I've now done. Turned out that it wasn't, and they were upset otherwise. But I was checking my emails like one evening before I went back to work after the summer holiday, and I had just heard about this like kind of some days earlier. And then I saw that from my superior, I had received this one-on-one meeting invite. With no explanation on like what that is about. And I was so sure that I'm going to get fired, like absolutely fired, that there's something, because I knew that this had been escalated really high up, and I knew that it could kind of appear as something that I've done wrong. And so eventually then I went to this meeting, super nervous, and I got a salary raise.
Oh, really?
So there was a happy ending to that, but it was very nerve-wracking and a horror story really that I still remember to this day. So.
No, well, it kind of tells you what you need to know. They're like that way that you can actually have the worst expectations and then actually things can end up really well.
Absolutely, but I did give feedback that the piece, like kind of in the future, includes some kind of description to this invite. It was quite nerve-wracking. So, yeah.
So as for challenges, what's the most challenging moment you've had in your career in the startup ecosystem so far?
Well, I think there's been a lot of challenges, and I think that's really kind of one of the cool things about the startup ecosystem, that there are challenges all the time, and it's really like one of the reasons why I'm so excited in working in this ecosystem, exactly for that reason, that every single day you get to solve these challenges that you never knew that you'd be able to solve. But a couple of stories, maybe first a personal one. So when I was working at Smartly, that was my first startup job, and then. I mean, obviously I'm a political scientist, so coming from the public side to my, like actually almost the first private sector job, and in a really sort of a high growth environment and like very dynamic, and you know how it is. And then on my second day, I found out that I'm pregnant, which was a bit like, all right, this was not like now a very convenient moment. And I was so nervous that how this is going to affect everything. And obviously it was a very kind of a, sort of a driven environment that would people really kind of see this as something of a positive thing, or would it actually like kind of hinder my development there? But actually that turned out really well as well, that everybody, like kind of the colleagues and the founders, they were super supportive, and I actually got a lot more responsibility and eventually when I returned to work after the maternity leave as well. So it was all good, and I didn't really have to worry, but that was something
wonderful to hear that. That's
quite nerve-wracking in that sense. The other thing is maybe just like these sort of anecdotal things that kind of in the startup ecosystem, you can end up in situations at a very short notice that you never thought you'd end up with. So for example, one time I was working with the Latin American market. So I've been in Brazil with a 2 hours notice, having to go to pitch to a meeting with Uber Latam's CEO. And something that, I mean, I had never done before in that sort of context. It was super challenging, that how do we convince that person to actually buy the service from us and so forth. So that was also something that kind of got done, and obviously in Portuguese, so which was adding to the complexity. But it turned out quite well as well. But there's been a lot of challenges.
Oh, there's still a lot of difficulty there you described. Blimey. So what would you say is the scariest part of the global startup ecosystem?
This is maybe the part where I would bring this sort of an impact side to the discussion, in the sense that I think the scariest part really is that the whole global startup ecosystem is still quite scattered, which is a bit sad. During this past year, I've visited a lot of different startup ecosystems in different parts of the world, and there are so many cool things being done in different parts of the world. But then the thing is that there's very little cooperation still between the different regions. Of course, we're always trying to learn from different ecosystems and people are traveling the world and so forth. But in order to kind of actually solve the whole climate crisis and kind of bring forward these innovations that actually can make a big sort of difference in scale. So there, I think we really should collaborate a lot more as well.
Yeah, I completely agree as well. Now, mistakes. They are part of the norm, but some feel like true nightmares. Can you tell us about a decision you made that haunts you to this day?
I was actually thinking about this long and hard, but I have this sort of philosophy in life that I always believe that whenever I make a decision, I always kind of try to assess all the different angles that I can think of at that specific moment. So therefore, I don't really believe in like kind of regrets or something. Of course, some of the decisions have been wrong, like, and they have been kind of, I've noticed afterwards that they were not the best ones, but I don't really get haunted by any decisions that I've made. Some of them have been wrong, but that's fine because they've been made with the best like kind of information available at the time. So
that's a very healthy way to look at it. That's a good constitution there.
Yeah.
If you could go back in time and give your past self a warning about anything, what would it be?
Well, this is partially maybe joking, but I would maybe warn myself about the startup ecosystem in the sense that it will really kind of capture you for life. Because it's something that once you've worked in this kind of environment and worked especially at a high growth startup like Smartly was for me, like my start of school really. So you can never do anything else. That really? For the rest of their life, like you're going to be working in things that are moving fast and you can never kind of get accustomed to anything slow anymore. And I'm not saying that it's a bad thing, it's a very good thing. Yeah, of course. But that's something that really has happened for me and I really love it. So
it's an interesting insight. So as for the culture, we know that you have experience working in Southern Europe and even Brazil. How would you say the ecosystem differs from the one we have in Finland?
I think quite substantially, especially from the point of view that here we are so casual, that everyone here kind of is able to chat to everyone and you can really reach out to the partner of a big investor or then you can call a CEO of a stock listed company with no problem. That really doesn't happen elsewhere. So there I think it's a huge advantage for us, especially in the sense that we're able to move things a lot faster when it's a lot more casual.
Which one do you find more terrifying and challenging for an early stage founder?
Well, I'd say that the environment where we live is definitely easier in the sense that like you have it a lot easier as many Finnish people are quite introverted and not maybe like best in social skills and so forth. So therefore, it's definitely easier to get by here, whereas it might be a bit more bureaucratic or a bit more hierarchical in some other regions as well. But I'm sure that there's like good and bad sides in both.
I agree. Lessons learned and reflections. People in the startup world often learn more from the things that go wrong than from success. What's the biggest lesson you've learned from a mistake or a failure?
Well, agreed to the concept in general that I think there's definitely a lot of learning to be done when something actually fails. In my case, I think one of the biggest learnings has really been about hiring, because I've hired probably hundreds of people during my career already. But what I really learned quite early was that whenever you are in a hurry or you're being like kind of swamped under the work that you have, and then you're hiring someone, you're kind of like overlooking some of the things because you really need like someone to help you, or you're not really kind of taking those potential, even like minor red flags into account. So then those are the kind of the moments when you really should focus. So I've hired people, for example, in the sense that I've had to fire them relatively soon afterwards, because then kind of in the actual work, we've then realized that this is actually not a very good match here, or the person doesn't like kind of fit the role that we were thinking and so forth. So therefore nowadays, like kind of using these learnings that I have. So whenever I'm hiring people, even though my calendar would be like super packed, but then I'm still trying to take all the time needed for the hires so that there's no compromises being made and every single kind of thing is taken into account. And if there is a red flag at the hiring phase, it's typically a red flag afterwards.
Yeah, so it's about being mindful of
yes.
These factors, yeah. So, to keep the Halloween spirit alive, if Maria 01 was a horror movie, what would it be called?
I actually put a lot of thought into this, probably like way too much, because it was actually quite an interesting case. But I wanted to kind of draw inspiration from our hospital background, because of course the whole hospital scenery that we have is a very sort of a good kind of a context for this. So I was kind of thinking, I had this chat with this one founder a while back, and he was talking about this, like how they were looking for funding, and then how they actually reached out to, I think it was about 300 investors, and every single one of them would tell no. And so then I thought that in our context, we'd probably be called like the eternal ward or something, where founders just end up pitching to investors who always say no. So it's like an endless loop.
Endless loop. Yeah. Oh my God, that sounds like a genuine nightmare as well. What advice would you give to aspiring entrepreneurs so that they can avoid their own startup horror stories? Maybe, what advice do you have?
Well, I think the advice that I would always give really is that really go to the market as early as you can. So find the first customers, like really, even though the product would be very early stage. So really go and like kind of show it to someone, get feedback and iterate on the feedback. So kind of continue with the loop so that you can actually get the feedback. So not just like kind of developing your own baby, but rather getting the feedback and understanding that is this something that somebody actually would be able to pay for. But at the same time, the other bit of advice that I would also give, kind of maybe reflecting back to my background and how like I'm not from tech at all, from my background, from my education and so forth. So I would really encourage founders to kind of in the future as well, hire the kind of people who come from very different backgrounds, because there's a lot of like motivation often involved and a lot of different kinds of skill sets that might be very useful for the startup ecosystem as well.
It's about keeping that constant communication, I suppose, and understanding between the customer. But yeah, exactly. Well, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate the time you've come here to do this interview.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.